Hello, welcome back again for the DevForce Silverlight tour. Coping with trouble. You know, sometimes the world deals you a rough hand. Or maybe you just shot yourself in the foot. Like we're going to do here, we're going to change the connection string and make it so that the application can no longer find the database. We'll then see the application exhibit mysterious behavior, and we'll learn to look at the DevForce produced debug log, which reveals all kinds of behind-the-scenes activity and is wonderful for diagnosing trouble. Having figured it out, we'll go back into the code and add the kind of error handling we should have added the first time. Here's our simple steps loading up, just as we left it. Happily loading data, employees, and orders just as we had it. But sometimes things don't go so well. Sometimes you may start with an application that's behaving like this, and then you make some kind of a change, you don't know what it was, and this isn't what happens. Let's introduce an error into our application. It's fairly easy to do. We'll do a very simple one, like suppose we change the connection string, and the connection string is sitting here in our web config. It's quite long, so it took me a second to find it. Here we go. We're going to the Northwind IB, and suppose for some reason it used to be known as XXX, Northwind XXX. We just mess it up a little bit. And now we run, and what happens? Well, it seems okay so far. Got the forms going. Loading employees. Oh, we got 0. That's no good. Now, in this case, we actually know what we did wrong, but I could easily imagine making some kind of change somewhere along the line, or somebody took the database down or something, and I have no clue, but my working application isn't working anymore. How am I going to diagnose the situation, and how might I have written my code better so that I would know when things like this happened and could react in a more reasonable way instead of just having the application appear not to work? Let's assume that it's all mysterious and we had no idea what was going on, so we'll close that up. One of the first things that I should always do whenever behavior is really mysterious is I should look at the DevForce debug log. This is just a great standard technique, and I'm going to show it to you now. By default, DevForce is always logging server activity, particularly the kinds of the queries and saves and all kinds of probing and things that it does. There's lots of things that it logs all by itself by default, and by the way, you can tie into our logging and put your own events into the log. When we built this from the template, I was pretty darn sure that we were still logging. So how do I know where and that we're doing so? If I open up the web config and I find the IdeaBlade configuration section, I'm bound to find a logging tag, which specifies a logging file, and by default it's almost always debuglog.xml, and by default it's almost always in a log subdirectory of the wherever the server is serving its stuff. So in IIS, in the directory, you would expect to find a log subdirectory. Now that we know that we really are logging, and by the way, if I wanted to disable logging, which I don't recommend during development, you just whack this. Now that I know where it is and that we're doing it, I should be able to go find it, and I can see that I've constructed a log folder right here. If I go up and say show all files, I'll now find that the debug log is sitting right there along with a CSS and an XSL to make it much prettier to look at. If I double click it, I'm going to be in trouble in Visual Studio because I'm actually running and the server's still running, and that's not going to give me the best experience anyway. When I say the server is still running, I mean I've just finished running that, and here's Cassini still operating. So if I turn this off, I could, well, let's go ahead and do it. I'll stop that server, and now I believe that if I double click this, yes, it does show up here in its raw form. But let's suppose I hadn't done that and I wanted to see it in a little better format. I can open containing folder, and that will show me right where I am. Let me widen this so that you can see we're right here in simple steps in the log. And now when I double click it, by default it should bring up a browser, and tell me that it's doing okay. And I cheated and made sure that I had actually already done this before. So here's the one that you would see. And now you can see that we are logging all kinds of things that happen as your application spins up. And because, by the way, we're in development mode and running this inside Visual Studio, you get a fresh log with each execution. So this, every time we run, this log will start from 0. In the real world, it would just accumulate. So you can see all kinds of things that are happening, all the things that we're probing for, and that's beyond the scope of what I'm trying to talk about. What really intrigues me is that we see that there was an exception, and all the information about it is just filling out this last event. And if you compare this time, you know, which I usually do, I can see, yeah, that's approximately, I know I just ran it. Okay, good. So anyway, here's an exception, and it's telling me that it cannot open it. If I'd really have to sort of zoom in here to read that better, but I can see that there's a problem with opening the database. Okay, which is not good, but it's a clue. And so this is a great source of all kinds of clues as to what is happening, what has been found, what hasn't been found, and in this particular case, what's going wrong with your application. So now we're on a path to fixing it. So again, I highly recommend that you keep this idea of the debug log very much in mind, and at the first sign of trouble, go look at it. By the way, one of the very positive things that we get out of this is the fact that there is a debug log and that the time does align tells us that we're at least talking to the server. Okay. In the worst case, where you have no debug log at all, it means that you can't even reach the server, and that's pretty valuable information in and of itself. But that is unlikely to happen to you as you're developing an application that was working and then suddenly stopped working. That's great for diagnostics, but shouldn't we have done something in the application itself? And yes, we should. And actually, I warned you about this way back in part 1. So let's go see what it was that I was talking about. So we've looked at the debug log, and it's giving us the exception. But that's kind of diagnostic as a programmer. We probably really want to intercept errors as they happen inside our code and do the right thing there, not try and do a post-mortem on it. Let's close that up and close the show all files and think about what we could have done in our application. Now you may recall, probably not, that way back in part 1 I warned that there was a problem and that we really, here it was, when we were first doing our query, I said, you know, we really should do some error handling. And I'm kind of regretting that I didn't even show it then. But it seemed like we should get on with business. But now I have to show it to you. Now that we think, oh yeah, we should put some error handling in here, you know, what should that error handling look like? One thought that may occur to you is that we should wrap this query execution in a try catch. So let's try that. And we'll just take the whole thing and we'll do that, and then we'll write the catch here, and we'll say, hey, we're interested in any exception. And we'll just carry it in something called caught. All right, that's not very helpful, but it gives us a place. We'll put the breakpoint there. But I'd like to watch the whole thing happen. So I'm going to put the first breakpoint here, and let's see what gives. So we'll try again. We're coming along, and good. We break at the beginning of the try, just as we're about to do the execute. We'll start walking through. We'll F10, and we're into the try, and now we're executing async, and whoa, we went right by it. And we're not even getting any exception and getting caught, even though we know the debug log said we will. And now we continue on with, hey, let's let her rip, no problem now, F5. And so it starts, and it comes back, and we're still in the same bad boat. We got nothing back. It's still as mysterious as before. So how do we interpret what happened here? Let's go back and see and walk this sort of together. We got to the try, and then we executed the async. Well, we're executing the async method on the client. Is the client throwing an exception? No, the client is not. It's simply preparing a query and sending it on to the server. As far as it's concerned, its job is done. This is not synchronous where it's waiting for the server to return. No, it's asynchronous. Its job is done. And there was no exception in invoking this method. Therefore, it fell right on through, passed right on with this, and went on with its business. No, the problem actually occurred on the server. That is where the query failed. That's where all the trouble lurks. That's where the connection string is being determined to be bad. No, this try-catch is completely ineffective, and we might as well get rid of it. And now you have an idea about why DevForce isn't bothering to throw anything on its own when an async operation fails. Basically, there's no place for you to do anything with the exception were we to throw it. So what we really need to do is we need to look at this callback, and we really have to pay attention to the operation value, which is going to have the exception. So let me show you what I mean. First of all, I'm going to clarify all of this code just so that we can see all of the operation right here. All right, we're just going to tidy it up. All right, so this is our callback method. Now what we're going to do is, instead of blithely just plucking the results out, is what we're going to do is we're going to say if, all right, there were no errors, that is to say, if this is null, then sure, go right ahead and process the results because they're fine. But if, on the other hand, there's a problem, then now let's diagnose what that is. And so we'll take the op.error and we'll see what that is. And I'm going to now put a breakpoint right there. Okay? So just to review, this is our callback method expressed as a lambda, but instead of just processing the results, we're checking the error first. And if we're cool, we just continue on. But if we're not cool, we'll figure out what goes on. Now let's execute and see what happens. It occurred to me later that I should have used an alternate and probably better syntax to illustrate this point. So through the magic of video editing, I can go back and show it to you. What I'm going to do is reverse the direction of the test and use the hasError property instead of checking to see if the error equals null. Makes the code so much more clean. If it has an error, then we do something like throw. That's where we would put our breakpoint. Otherwise, we can just continue as we had originally done. Personally, I find this way better. Obviously, both of them work. Now back to our story. We'll watch down here in the log area. Notice it's fetching, okay? All right, so it made it to the server. We'd long gotten past the execute async. Now we're in the callback, and yes, indeed, we do have an error coming back from the server. You see it's an entity server exception. It's telling us exactly what's wrong. It can't open up the database named Northwind IB XXX. Now you've got the clue. You're on your way to figuring it out. It might have been some other, in this case, we'd have no alternative but to shut down, but maybe there was something that was going on that you could reasonably do something in the application to continue. So that's what you want to do. You want to make sure that in every asynchronous operation, you pay attention to the value of op.error. And if we go find the save, we really should do the same thing there, just as it suggests, but that's an exercise I'll leave to another lesson. Thus ends another episode of the DevForce Silverlight Tour. Thanks for watching. Come back to our website and other resources to learn more about using DevForce.